A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay. A new episode every single day. Episode 12:1, Macedonia, Ekphora. Funeral Procession Part 1. Amidst the freezing slate gray light of dawn, the city gates of Pella groaned heavily upon their iron hinges. The funeral procession, the Ekphora, bearing the physical remnants of the assassinated King Alexander II, flowed toward the ancestral heartland of Macedonia, like a continuous river of polished bronze and black silk. The trajectory from the administrative palace of Pella to Igi, the sacred burial ground of the Argead house, was a punishing 40-mile ordeal saturated with suffocating dust and a merciless summer heat that warped the horizon. This was an archaic highway, its parameters strictly governed by the unyielding customs of the Argead clan. By order of these ancient ordinances, while a sovereign was being returned to the earth, no legitimate member of the royal bloodline was permitted to mount a horse or a carriage. To position oneself upon a steed during the sacred procession was classified as the ultimate hubris, a treasonous act of placing oneself physically higher than the dead. Driven by this law, the royal family was forced to traverse the entire burning expanse on foot, their leather sandals thin against the sharp stone, their lungs filling with gray handfuls of dust whipped up from the Macedonian plains. The royal hearse was a masterwork of architectural mourning, releasing sharp, grinding screeches beneath the massive density of its own weight. Bound in heavy drapes of Tyrian purple silk and midnight black cloth, the carriage was dragged by 8 white female donkeys, lowly, earth-bound beasts whose manes had been shaved entirely to the hide in public display of absolute grief. A gilded canopy supported by elegant Ionian columns shielded the king's corpse, while at its 4 corners stood golden statues of Nike, their wings aggressively unfurled as if to violently wrench the spirit of the Argead sovereign up into the stars. While the rest of the court crawled along the dust-choked highway from Pella, old General Attalus was already anchored inside the sacred perimeter of Igi. He did not march in the dust. His duty was far more critical. As the commander of the Old Guard veteran units, he had ridden ahead to hold the ancestral wall and secure the royal tombs. Throughout this entire opening day of the funeral span, the old general stood on the ancient limestone ramparts of Igi, treating the arrival of Ptolemy's advance scouts with a cold, minimalist military formality. Let the usurper parade the boy's bones across the plain, Attalus calculated silently, his weathered hands gripping the cold stone of the battlement as he watched the horizon. Ptolemy thinks managing the funeral gives him the right to manage the succession. But a crown is only as good as the spears that defend it, and the spears in this valley answer to the blood of Amyntas, not a regent's ledger. Old Attalus spent the final hours of the day strategically deploying his battle-hardened, heavily armed veterans to lock down every narrow entrance and choke point leading into the sacred burial grounds. He was constructing a silent, bristling counterweight to the regent's personal estate guards. If Ptolemy attempts to turn this holy ritual into a stage for a second palace purge, the old commander reasoned, his jaw setting into a hard, unyielding line, he will find that the gates of Igi do not open for traitors. I will hold this perimeter until the ashes are cold. If the Argead line is to break, it will not happen under my watch, and it will not happen inside the tombs of our fathers. Near the center of the column, Princess Eurino walked. Her ankles ached, her skin was raw from the shifting grit, and her breath was a shallow, burning rasp. Yet she refused to slow down, keeping her head bowed beneath the heavy black lace of her veil, a perfect picture of a devastated sister following her brother's bones. The rhythmic clatter of hooves broke her focus. Ptolemy of Aloros pulled his great black warhorse alongside her, his silver-mounted bridle jingling softly. He looked down at her, his face a carefully composed mask of masculine concern and marital authority. Eurino, Ptolemy called out, his voice dropping into a low, gravelly frequency meant to mimic tenderness. Stop this madness. You have been on your feet since the outer gates of Pella. Your brother is in the arms of the gods, but you are still of the living. Mount my spare horse. Let the soldier see the regent caring for his wife. Eurino stopped dead in the middle of the rocky road. The entire column behind her halted with a synchronous metallic clash of shields. Slowly, she raised her head. Beneath the dark webbing of her veil, her face was wet with sweat and strategically summoned tears. She let out a sharp, pathetic sob that sounded as fragile as a breaking bird's wing. She trembled violently, clutching at her own throat as if the very air of the valley were suffocating her. No, I cannot, she wept, her voice a reedy, heartbroken whisper that carried just far enough for the nearby guards to hear. She shrank away from his horse, burying her face in her hands. Do not ask it of me, my lord. My knees are weak, yes, but my heart is broken into pieces. If I ride above the men, I look away from his coffin. Let me walk in the dirt. Let me mourn the boy I grew up with. I'm nothing but sorrow. Ptolemy sighed, a theatrical exhale of a burdened husband dealing with a hysterical woman. He reached down, adjusting his reins. As you wish, my love. But do not ruin your health for the dead. With a tight nod, he spurred his horse back to the front of the line. The moment his back turned, the sobbing stopped. Behind the dark lace of her mask, Uranos' face instantly calcified into stone. She wiped a stray tear from her cheek with a cold, deliberate finger. Let him think I am a fragile flower, she thought, her pulse slowing to a lethal, steady rhythm as she resumed the march. Let the whole court think grief has consumed my mind. Playing the weeping princess was an easy task. She had watched the women of Pella use tears as armor since she was a child. The real challenge wasn't inventing the sorrow, it was suppressing the volcanic white-hot rage that threatened to rip through her chest. She was supposed to be a victim of despair, a helpless bride caught in a political storm. But beneath the silk and the lace, her blood was shifting. He claims he did not do it, she reasoned, her mind cutting through the dust of the road like a scalpel. He looked me in the eye and swore he had nothing to gain from a ruined kingdom. If he lied, he is a demon. But if he told the truth, who held the blade? The question didn't terrify her anymore, it sharpened her. She was no longer the naive girl who believed in wedding vows and palace romances. The gentle husband from her marriage bed was a ghost. She felt the phantom weight of her ancestors pressing into her spine. She wasn't just an Argead prize to be traded to foreign courts. The fierce, unyielding blood of Lyncestis, the mountain warlords who ruled the crags through raw terror and iron willpower, ran thick in her veins. If Ptolemy or Argead, or some faceless outsider, thought that they could use her as a decorative piece on their chessboard, they were grievously mistaken. She would play weak until they stopped watching her. And then she would show them what a mountain princess does to the wolves who invade her home. On this first day, the mandatory religious piece of the funeral march held the core of the lowland kingdom in a frozen, protective stillness. But the borders were already beginning to fray at the edges. The dust of the highway had settled over the sprawling column like a calcified shell. The drums from the funeral car kept their heavy, unyielding beat, but beneath the rhythm, the individual players on the chessboard began to tighten their ropes. Behind Uranos, Philip marched directly within the tracks carved by the heavy wheels of the hearse, his slate-gray pupils anchored to the microscopic dust rising from the roadbed. With every respiration he drew, his palate registered the dry taste of parched earth overlaid by the remote, persistent residue of myrrh, utilized by the embalmers to preserve his brother's flesh. Beside him, the newly confirmed king, Perdiccas III, moved like a hollowed-out phantom. "Raise your chin, King Perdiccas," Philip whispered. His voice was pitched so low it was nearly swallowed by the rhythmic, clinical crunch of iron-rimmed military boots striking the sun-baked stones. His gaze remained seamlessly fixed on the monumental colonnades ahead, his neck muscles entirely motionless. If you crawl with your eyes glued to the dirt, those wolves will deduce that the king of Macedonia is frantically searching for a place to conceal his own skin, that you are trembling on the very highway out of Pella. Perdiccas' mind was a scattered, bleeding wreck. 1 hour, he was a secondary prince, and the next, Alexander was dead, a bloody corpse in the Great Hall, and the crown was violently forced onto his own head under a vulture's regency. This funeral march felt like a fever dream under a scorching, merciless sun. The long hours on foot were a grueling torment, but the psychological weight was worse. I am next. Every shadow that fell across him felt like the shadow of the coffin. He wanted to scream, to break rank, to run away into the hills, but the heavy ceremonial robes pinned him to the earth. I am tracking the fluid metrics of blood, Perdiccas rumbled back. His profile shifted a fraction of an inch, revealing a face so pale and drenched in sweat it resembled a tragic theatrical mask. His eyes crawled obsessively across the parched soil of the road. The earth beneath our boots is not merely damp, Philip semicolon. It has been systematically drenched for generations. Our father's blood. Our brother's blood. A sickening certainty settled deep in his chest. His turn was coming. It was a matter of months, perhaps weeks, before he too was struck down, returned to this very dirt, to enter the cold realms of Hades, rejoining Alexander and Amyntas in the dark. I master that fact down to the bone, brother, Philip countered. His voice caught the low, freezing friction of an absolute pragmatist, a tone so devoid of juvenile fear it made Perdiccas shiver. But that is precisely why we must lock our eyes onto the horizon. We must meticulously analyze the exact methodology and strategic calculus they deployed to drain that blood. We must engrave those metrics into the absolute compass of our retinas. And when our hour strikes, we will use that calculated arithmetic to violently terminate this entire theater of slaughter through raw, unyielding power. Perdiccas released a sharp, clipped breath that sounded like a sob. Compressed by the predatory, terrifying weight of his 14-year-old brother's intellect, the young king felt the phantom grip of his fear loosen just enough to breathe. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his chin toward the unforgiving sky, forcing his mind to go completely blank as he looked up into the blinding light. That odor is by no means the scent of blood, youths, a sharp, booming resonance cut into their perimeter from the rear. Ptolemy of Aloros spurred his massive black warhorse forward, aligning his mount directly beside the walking princes. Exploiting the ancestral custom that bound the bloodline to the dirt, he looked down upon them from his saddle, cutting the figure of an absolute conqueror rather than a mourner, his polished bronze cuirass reflecting the summer sun like a burning mirror. That is the fragrance of destiny, young princes, Ptolemy rumbled, adjusting his heavy purple-trimmed cloak, with a slow, deliberate flex of his forearm. The gods have released their oracle across this valley. You would do well to subordinate your ears to its cadence. A throne is not a heritage of comfort, it is an altar of structural pragmatism. To prevent hostile anti-regency aristocratic factions from closing the distance to the princes and initiating a fresh court conspiracy, Ptolemy had deployed his private cavalry units along the flanks of the column, effectively transforming the sacred funeral into a clinical display of domestic military force. The heavy thud of their hooves created an inescapable wall of bronze and muscle around the brothers. Yet behind his mask, his inner focus remained hyper-narrowed. Trapped at the head of the crawl, Ptolemy secretly utilized this first day to dispatch his absolute final wave of couriers to the coastal ports. He knew that if his private timber deals with Athens collapsed, his foreign credit lines would vanish, and with them, his ability to pay the mercenaries holding off Pausanias. His focus drifted toward the riders directly behind his spine, the rising commanders and veteran pillars of the Macedonian officer cadre. He leaned down slightly from his saddle, his shadow completely swallowing the young king Perdiccas. "Look at them, Perdiccas," Ptolemy whispered, nodding back toward the iron-faced men on horseback. "The heteroi, the king's companions. They do not follow tears, nor do they bleed for sentiment. Your late brother Alexander forgot that the crown is a calculation of leverage, not a license for theatrical hubris. He left the treasury bare and the borders burning. If I had not stepped into the gap tonight, young king, those very men behind us would already be carving up your kingdom into minor principalities." Philip did not flinch, his eyes remaining locked on the horizon as the dust swirled around his sandals. "And what does the calculation demand of the protector today, Regent?" the 14-year-old prince asked, his voice matching the low, freezing friction of an absolute pragmatist. "A treaty signed in Athenian silver, or a kingdom bartered away to the south to purchase your own survival." Ptolemy's jaw tightened, a microscopic ripple passing across his defensive posture. He looked down at Philip, measuring the sharp, terrifyingly mature intellect behind the boy's slate-gray pupils. "It demands that you remain alive to learn how an empire is actually engineered, boy," Ptolemy hissed back, a harsh, defensive sincerity breaking through his theatrical tone. "Even if you hate me for the iron I place on your shoulders, you will thank me when you have the marrow to rule a ruin." Beyond the valley of mourning, the rest of the world refused to weep. Completely ignoring the internal tragedy of the northern kingdom, Pelopidas of Thebes had not yet formally integrated his column into the funeral march. Yet, on the extreme chessboard of 4th-century diplomacy, a commander of his caliber was mathematically incapable of leaving the movements of a fractured kingdom unmonitored. Let the barbarians weep over their dead boy king until their throats are raw, Pelopidas calculated silently, his fingers tracing the bronze rim of his round hoplite shield as his horse crested a low ridge overlooking the northern border. Thebes did not break the Spartan hegemony at Leuctra, just to watch Macedonia dissolve into a playground for Illyrian raiders or Athenian timber merchants. If Pella cannot secure its own gates, I will forge a lock for them myself. Long before the main body of the sacred band would materialize to initiate the formal audits regarding the regency and the extraction of hostages, Pelopidas used this first day to execute a masterclass in aggressive logistics. He pushed his elite veteran heavy infantry and Thessalian cavalry up the main southern highway in a relentless, punishing forced march that ran parallel to the crawling Argead cortege. His men moved with a lethal, rhythmic efficiency, their iron-shod boots eating the miles under a blistering sun without a single break in formation. Ptolemy thinks the funeral custom buys him a 3-day shield, the Boeotian general reasoned coldly, his eyes tracking the massive, miles-long column of gray dust rising from the valley below. He forgets that a treaty signed in blood only binds the men who are afraid to spill more of it. By the time that corpse hits the ash at Igi, my vanguard will already be holding the crossroads. To ensure absolute precision, he deployed his elite Theban scouts along the jagged ridgelines flanking the highway. Moving as silent, earth-toned shadows among the limestone crags, these tactical operators monitored the exact vector, speed, and guard strength of the Argead procession. They offered zero superficial expressions of mourning. They simply observed the crawl with the clinical, unblinking focus unique to apex predators. For the walking princes and the maneuvering factions below, the silhouettes of those scouts were a terrifying, silent confirmation. The iron hammer of Thebes was already suspended directly over Ptolemy's throat, waiting for the precise moment to drop. To the west, King Bartolus of Illyria exploited the court's first day of paralysis to solidify his conquest. Let the lowland fools drag their dead king through the dirt at a snail's pace, Bartolus calculated silently, his weathered fingers gripping the carved bone hilt of his heavy Sika blade as he looked down from a granite crag. Their laws freeze their spears, but the mountain air does not wait for priests. For 40 years I have bled the house of Amyntas, and every time they weep I take another valley. Pella is a fat, dying beast, and its sons are too busy fighting over the skin to defend the meat. The octogenarian warlord moved with a terrifyingly precise geopolitical cruelty. He systematically locked his massive heavy shield infantry squares onto the high strategic foothills overlooking Upper Macedonia, transforming the rugged ridges into an unassailable bastion of iron and oak. His tribal phalanges stood in dense, silent formations, their interlocking shields forming a wall that choked the mountain passes and severed the lowland core from its northern dependencies. Ptolemy thinks his Athenian gold can buy a border, Bartolus reasoned, a cold, predatory amusement flaring in his eyes as he watched the distant column of gray dust rising from the Ekphora. But gold cannot fill a mountain pass when the iron is already there. I will build a cage of spears around their valley before they can even light the pyre. To accelerate the collapse of the central government, he unleashed his light cavalry raiders, allowing them to torch minor Argead border outposts within plain sight of the valley below. Great plumes of black, greasy smoke punctured the summer sky, visible to the marching noblemen and the trembling levies on the highway. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Bartolus was intentionally maximizing the domestic border panic, turning the sacred funeral into a claustrophobic trap, while the regency remained too legally bound by ancient custom to launch a counteroffensive. Every rising column of smoke was a silent, mocking reminder from the western mountains. We are already here, and you are too busy weeping to strike back. To the east, Pausanias the Pretender swept through the coastal plains with an insatiable, long-denied hunger. Let Ptolemy bleed his wealth into the dirt, Pausanias calculated silently, his fingertips tracing the gilded Argead crest emblazoned upon his silver signet ring, as he watched his mercenary vanguard clear the palisades of a captured Macedonia outpost. He thinks he can rule Macedonia with a merchant's ledgers and an assassin's contract. He forgets that the crown belongs to the claimant, who takes it with a naked blade, not the advisor who crawls into it through a palace conspiracy. While Pella weeps for a dead boy, I am reclaiming my birthright block by block. Knowing that the regent's frantic silver bribes were still traveling at a snail's pace through the rugged, mud-choked mountain passes, Pausanias weaponized the delay with lethal efficiency. His gold-incentivized mercenaries, hardened veterans from the Chalcidian frontiers, who fought for the highest bidder, relentlessly absorbed key settlements across the fertile plains of Macedonia. They did not halt for a funeral truce. They rode down the unmonitored coastal garrisons, replacing the standard of Pella with the pretender's own colors before the local commanders could even verify the rumors of Alexander II's death. The regent thinks custom buys him a shield, Pausanias reasoned coldly, his eyes tracking the eastern horizon where the trade roads cut cleanly toward the capital. But a sacred custom doesn't lock a city gate when the guards haven't been paid in 3 moons. Pella is a hollow shell, waiting for a true sovereign to crack it open. By sunset, his advance columns had systematically secured the critical junctions along the eastern coastal corridors, positioning his formidable mercenary vanguard, just a 3 days rapid march from Pella's completely unprotected gates. Pausanias had transformed the temporary leadership vacuum into a lightning offensive, positioning his forces like a coiled viper on the capital's eastern flank, ready to strike the moment the funeral fire turned to ash at Igi. To be continued in Episode 12, Part 2. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias Playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle Playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below. Urano has seamlessly adopted the mask of a broken flower to deceive Ptolemy, while Philip is already building a cold, calculated matrix of revenge in his retinas. On this first day of the Ekphora, with the regent leveraging his position from horseback over the walking princes, who do you think is truly dictating the trajectory of the march? Drop your breakdowns below.